Exactly 2:14 a.m. was the moment I finally stopped telling myself this was a mistake. I was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, the only light spilling from my laptop screen, and I'd been staring at the exact same spreadsheet for 40 minutes. My coffee was ice cold. There was a low-frequency buzz in my left ear. The ring that hasn't gone away since a dirt road outside of Kandahar took a piece of my skull, and there was a list of 18 bank transfers, totaling $23,400, all moving out of my VA disability compensation account to a routing number I didn't recognize. I had told myself 3 separate times over the previous 2 weeks that there had to be a reason, that the numbers were confusing because of the TBI, that maybe I'd authorized something I just didn't remember. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I stopped telling myself that. Have you ever sat alone in a quiet room at 2 in the morning and realized that the person you trusted completely had been making choices about your life while you were too broken to check? Let me know in the comments, because I want to know how many of us there are. And stay with me, because what I did next took 6 months to prepare and about 4 minutes to execute. My name is Morgan Hayes. I served 11 years in the United States Army as a military intelligence officer. 2 deployments. Mosul, then Kandahar. On a Thursday morning in early March, during that second deployment, the vehicle I was in hit an IED on a dirt road outside a village whose name I won't share here, because some information belongs only to the people who lived through it. The blast killed Private First Class Donovan Torres, who was sitting in the front passenger seat. He was 24 years old and had told me 2 days prior that his wife was pregnant with their first child. I think about him with a specific, persistent frequency that I long ago stopped trying to control. The explosion left me with a traumatic brain injury, a shattered left tibia that required an external fixation frame for 11 weeks, 2 damaged lumbar vertebrae, a ruptured spleen requiring emergency surgery, and that ringing in my left ear that now serves as a permanent reminder of the exact price my service commanded. I was evacuated to Landstuhl, then moved to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, where I would spend the better part of the next 14 months reconstructing a version of myself that could exist outside a hospital. The Army awarded me the Purple Heart. A 2-star general pinned it to my hospital gown during a bedside ceremony. While I was still on a pain management protocol that made everything feel a beat delayed, I have a photograph from that day. I look equal parts proud and confused, which, from what I understand, is the entirely correct response to both combat trauma and military ceremonies. My name is Morgan Hayes, and I'm telling you all of this not because I need your sympathy. I'm telling you because the injury is how my sister got access to my finances. And the finances are how I found out who my sister really was when no one was looking. Kayla is 3 years younger than I am. She is genuinely charming, the kind of person who makes everyone in a room feel personally noticed, which is a real skill, and I say that without any qualifiers. She also has the same relationship with accountability that some people have with a gym membership. Sincere in January, largely theoretical by March. Growing up, she was the one who forgot her homework, borrowed money with no intention of returning it, and said, "Everything will be fine" in situations where she really meant, "Someone else will fix this." That someone was usually me. From the time I was 13, I had learned to read a specific expression on my mother's face. The one that signaled a Kayla problem was incoming and about to become a family responsibility. My mother wasn't cruel. She loved Kayla fiercely, and in a way that left almost no room for consequences. And Kayla, for her part, understood the value of being loved that way very well. This happened the Christmas before my second deployment. I was home on leave. I had been saving for 14 months to pay off the last of my student loans. Over dinner, Kayla mentioned, not asked, just mentioned that she was having a rough couple of months financially. My mother looked at me. Not Kayla. Me. The look you give a vending machine when you want something out of it. I wrote Kayla a check for $1,200 before I flew back to base. She Venmoed me a coffee emoji as a thank you. I want you to understand the architecture of that relationship, because it explains everything that came later. I joined the Army at 22 after graduating college on an ROTC scholarship. People assume it was patriotism. The truth is closer to structure, distance, and a performance evaluation system based on objective metrics, rather than whether you pleased the right person. I became a lieutenant and found out I was very good at intelligence work, pattern recognition, information analysis, finding the thing that didn't fit. It turns out those skills had been drilled into me years prior, in a house where reading the room correctly was a survival metric. When I was transferred to Walter Reed, I wasn't in a state to manage anything. For the first 3 weeks, the TBI made holding a phone steady almost impossible. I had a neurologist, an orthopedic surgeon, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a speech-language pathologist, and a social worker named Denise who visited twice a week and always brought coffee from the hospital cafeteria that tasted like hot brown disappointment. I drank every cup gratefully, because Denise was there, and Denise was professionally, relentlessly kind, in the way that, at that point in my life, felt like a form of medicine. My parents were both gone, my father to a heart attack the year before I deployed, my mother to cancer during my first deployment. My military friends were deployed or stationed elsewhere. That left Kayla, who called me within hours of the notification, who flew in within 3 days with a roller bag and that focused, slightly solemn face she usually wore when she wanted to be seen as capable. She stayed for 2 weeks and actually helped. She organized mail, coordinated with the administrative support officer on paperwork, bought me a phone with a larger screen because the visual disturbances made small text hard to read. She sat through physical therapy sessions I wasn't sure I'd make it through. I want to be clear about that. Kayla showed up. For those 2 weeks, she was the sister I had always hoped she could be. Before she flew back to Nashville, I signed a limited financial power of attorney. A JAG officer drafted it with deliberate specificity. Kayla was authorized to pay utilities, maintain the lease on my Virginia apartment, receive mail, and handle routine bills. The document explicitly excluded investment accounts. It explicitly excluded my VA disability compensation account. I remember the JAG officer reading those exclusions aloud. I remember Kayla nodding. I remember thinking I'd been appropriately careful. I was careful about the document. I was careless about the execution monitoring. It turns out those are 2 different things. The VA disability compensation started arriving once my injuries were rated at 70%. The leg, the TBI, the vertebral damage, the tinnitus, and a handful of secondary conditions I won't detail here. Reliable, monthly, designated for my medical recovery. That reliability. In the context of a recovery where I couldn't work and expenses accumulated in ways that are genuinely shocking until you live through them. Assistive equipment, specialized therapy, co-pays, the higher cost of moving through the world with severe physical trauma. That reliability was the line between stability and crisis. Kayla managed things for 2 weeks and then went home. The power of attorney remained in place because I hadn't officially revoked it. I had intended to, but hadn't, because at the time, I was learning how to walk again. 8 months passed. By August, I was stable enough to manage my own finances. I logged into the account expecting a clean ledger. Accumulated disability payments, rent paid, utilities handled. Instead, I saw 18 transactions I didn't recognize. Not large, never large enough to trigger an automatic alert. Anywhere from $380 to $950, appearing every 2 to 3 weeks, moving outward to a routing number I didn't recognize. 18 times. Over 14 months, totaling. I had to add it 3 times because my brain was still working around the damage. $23,400. I called the bank's fraud line. The transactions were confirmed as authorized under the power of attorney on file. There was no fraud on the bank's end. The document said someone could do this, so someone did. I didn't say anything to anyone. I opened a notebook. Recording everything was a compensation strategy. My occupational therapist had taught me to manage the effects of the TBI on memory and information processing, and I logged every date and every amount. Then I sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open and did the only thing that made sense to me at the time. I was counting, not angry, not panicking, counting. The distinction matters. 14 months in military intelligence before the injury had drilled into me how to handle a threat. You don't react until you have the entire picture. You observe, you document, you wait for the tactically correct moment. I had just received information that required a response. That response would take 6 months to prepare. In the meantime, I said absolutely nothing to anyone. I called Patricia. Patricia Okafor was a forensic accountant I found through a recommendation from my JAG contact at Walter Reed, 63 years old. Reading glasses on a beaded cord, and the specific professional energy of someone who had spent decades finding what people tried to hide in numbers. Her fee was $1,100. It remains the most important $1,100 I have ever spent. She took 14 months of bank records, every statement I could generate, the POA document, and my annotated notebook, and she built me a complete picture in 11 days. She sent the report via email on a Tuesday morning. I read it at the kitchen table at 2:14 a.m., and that was when I stopped calling it a mistake. 14 months, 18 transfers, 380, 640, 520, 900, 475, 850, 710, 380, 900, 510, 820, 640, 950, 480, 700, 850, 380, 900. Every amount was different. Every gap between 2 and 4 weeks. The variation was intentional. Different amounts at irregular intervals are less likely to trigger pattern detection. Whoever structured these transactions understood that. Total, $23,400. 100% taken from the account the POA had explicitly excluded. Patricia had added a note at the bottom of the report. It simply said, "Transactions correlate with the timeline of a significant personal expenditure event beginning in October." She attached, without comment, a printout from my sister's Instagram account. An engagement announcement, #Kayla's Forever Day, a venue announcement, a tag from a bridal boutique, a photographer announcement. I opened Kayla's Instagram. The 9th transaction had been executed on October 14th, $900, highlighted in yellow on Patricia's spreadsheet. On October 15th, Kayla posted a photo of 2 hands holding mimosas over a marble spa table. The caption read, "Pre-wedding self-care era." The post had 14,000 likes. 14,000 people had told my sister her life looked beautiful. On October 15th, I had spent the morning in physical therapy learning how to navigate lateral stairs. The therapist holding the gait belt around my waist caught me twice when my leg gave out. I went home and slept for 4 hours. I closed Instagram. I went back to the spreadsheet. I kept counting. At some point during the reading, my mind went back to a Tuesday 6 months prior. A florist shop in Nashville. 40 minutes of selecting Casablanca lilies. Kayla holding up 2 glass cylinder vases and asking me which style I liked better. I had been sitting on a folding chair because my legs still couldn't handle prolonged standing. I told her I liked the crystal ones. She smiled and said, "Perfect." "Me too." And the florist wrote something down. I had thought I was helping her plan something beautiful. I had been helping her spend $23,400 of my disability money. Have you ever trusted someone completely? Given them access to your accounts, your home, things you couldn't protect yourself because you were too sick, too far, or too exhausted to monitor, then discovered they'd been serving themselves while you weren't looking? I want you to share in the comments, because the thing nobody talks about is this. The hardest part isn't the money. It's the inventory you have to take afterward of every moment you thought you were being loved when you were actually being managed. Subscribe if you believe that being the reliable one in a family shouldn't mean being the unprotected one. I have more of this story to tell. And the next part is when things get very quiet and very precise. I sat with the $23,400 for 3 days, Not because I needed time to decide what to do. I had decided within 45 minutes of reading Patricia's report. I sat with it because I needed to understand what I was holding. In military intelligence, there's a concept called the collection-to-action gap, the window of time between gathering information and being positioned to execute an effective operation. Moving too quickly based on incomplete understanding produces poor outcomes. You need verification, analysis, the total picture. My 3 days were the collection-to-action gap. I wasn't delaying. I was making certain. The thing that kept rising during those 3 days wasn't the sum. It was the timeline. Kayla had sat next to me in physical therapy in April, watching me relearn how to bear weight on a reconstructed limb. She had held my hand when I cried from the pain. By that point, she had already executed 14 transfers. The deposits on her venue were documented in a ledger Patricia would later recover. That proximity, the intimacy and the exploitation occurring simultaneously, was what I needed 3 days to fully comprehend. 3 days. Then I called my attorney. Here was my decision. I would not confront Kayla privately. I want to be transparent about this because I know it's the choice people have the strongest reaction to. I have watched Kayla navigate accountability for 29 years. A private confrontation with a person who has a sophisticated relationship with reframing narratives just produces more reframing. She would cry. She would explain. She would offer a partial admission wrapped in enough qualifiers to render it unrecognizable as responsibility. She had practiced this her entire life, and she was very good at it. More importantly, the purpose of intelligence isn't simply to know a thing. It's to act on what you know at the tactically correct moment, in the tactically correct manner, to achieve the outcome you actually seek. What outcome did I seek? Not an apology, not just restitution. Though restitution was non-negotiable, I wanted total. Witnessed, undeniable accountability. I wanted a moment that could not be rewritten in the retelling. 140 people were going to be at that wedding. That was the tactically correct window. While I was preparing, I learned something else. Serena, the person I asked to accompany me, mentioned in passing that she had seen posts from Kayla's maid of honor, Madison, on social media. Madison had told the other bridesmaids, in group chats that Serena had screenshot, that Kayla's wedding was beautiful because her military sister has all that disability money and is basically covering the extras. She's so sweet. She had built and distributed a fiction to cover the theft. Not at Kayla's explicit direction from what I could determine, but in the way that people who benefit from convenient narratives tend to voluntarily maintain them. Madison wasn't the one transferring the funds, but she was the one making the transfers sound like generosity. That's a different kind of labor, and it required a separate calculation. 22 days before the wedding, Kayla texted me at 9:47 a.m. I was at my desk looking at the 4th draft of my speech when the notification appeared. The text read, "Hey, the final vendor payment is due, having a small cash flow issue. Can you float $1,800 temporarily? I'll sort it out after the honeymoon." She included a smiling emoji. I looked at the text for about 15 seconds. Then I opened my evidence folder, created a new document, and labeled it Exhibit 19. Text message. 9:47 a.m. 22 days prior to event. Cash request $1,800. Total requested during collection window. $1,800. I saved the screenshot. I didn't reply to Kayla. She sent a follow-up 12 minutes later. "No worries if you can't. Just thought I'd ask." I labeled that Exhibit 20. I worked with Patricia to condense the full report into a single-page summary. Clean font. Dated transactions. Exact amounts. Source account. Destination account. The POA exclusion language. Readable by any adult in about 90 seconds. I had it printed and sealed into 90 manila envelopes. My attorney, after reviewing the plan, confirmed it was legally defensible in that flat tone lawyers use when they think you're doing something unprecedented but technically sound. I wrote the speech 4 times. The challenge was precision without accusation, factual without cruelty, firm without giving anyone a reason to dismiss it as emotional. Military briefings are good training for this. You provide the information accurately and completely. You don't offer commentary beyond what the facts require. You let the facts do the heavy lifting. 4 drafts to get there. Brendan, my physical therapist and a fellow veteran, listened to the entire speech without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Is there something you want me to say? Or are you just showing me?" I told him I was just showing him. He nodded. "Then you already know what you're doing." That was enough. I asked Captain Serena Diaz to come with me as my +1. Intelligence background, currently in law school. The kind of composure that gets forged under actual pressure. Quiet, concise, no tendency toward unnecessary commentary. "Do you want me to hold the envelopes?" she asked. I said yes. She said, "Okay." And that was the entire planning conversation. What followed was 6 months of being an enthusiastic, highly participatory maid of honor. 3 weeks after Patricia's report. Kayla FaceTimed me to preview her dress fitting. She stood in front of the mirror in the sample gown. Strapless, ivory, structured bodice, and turned slowly. She asked me what I thought. I told her it was stunning. Because it was. She asked about cap sleeves versus off the shoulder. I told her off the shoulder. It suited her better. She laughed and said she thought so too. Then she said, "I don't know what I'd do without you this year." My banking app was open in the background on my phone. I'd checked the balance right before she called. I swiped the app away and said, "You don't have to worry about that." She didn't know I had a folder on my laptop named KH Financial Record containing Patricia's full report, 18 logged transactions, the attorney correspondence, the summary sheets printed inside 90 sealed envelopes, and, as of 22 days prior to the wedding, Exhibit 19 and Exhibit 20. She didn't know the speech existed, drafted 4 times, sitting in a file named Final on my desktop. She only knew her sister was smiling through a phone screen and telling her the dress was beautiful. I wasn't lying. The dress was beautiful. That was the piece I had to hold carefully during those 6 months. 2 things simultaneously true. The dress was beautiful. The person wearing it had financed it with money meant for my rehabilitation. I loved my sister. I was going to stand up at her wedding and say exactly what she had done in front of everyone who came to celebrate her. There was no contradiction in that canceled each other out. You keep the weapon at the ready. Not aimed, but not lowered either. Presence. Patience. Waiting for the tactically correct window. The night before the wedding, I did one final review. Not of the documents. Those had been ready for weeks. I opened Kayla's Instagram. Her most recent post was from that morning. A flat lay photo of her veil, her shoes, and a single white Casablanca lily on a marble surface. The same variety we'd looked at together in the florist shop in Nashville 6 months prior, when I sat on a folding chair because my leg wouldn't handle the standing and helped her choose. The caption read, "Tomorrow." 1 word. 42,000 likes. I looked at the image for exactly as long as I needed to. Then I closed the app, set my alarm, and went to sleep. The wedding took place on a Saturday in September, an outdoor garden venue outside Nashville. White folding chairs arranged in perfect rows, a wooden arbor covered in greenery, string lights overhead that would look beautiful once it got dark. It was genuinely beautiful. Kayla had spent an enormous amount of time on the details, and it showed. She was at the altar in the gown we'd selected together, off the shoulder, ivory, the train exactly as she'd described wanting. And when the processional music started and I watched her walk down the aisle on the arm of Derek's brother, because our father was gone, there was a sensation in my chest that I hadn't anticipated. Love and clarity are not opposites. I loved my sister, and I knew exactly what she had done. And I was going to say it in front of everyone. All of it was simultaneously true. I sat in my wheelchair in the front row during the ceremony because the garden ground was uneven, and my legs still didn't handle unpredictable terrain well for long periods. The altar arrangements had Casablanca lilies, tall stems on either side of the arbor, white against the green. I noticed them the way you notice things when you already have the total context, not just beauty. A financial ledger. The reception was held in a restored barn. $6,800 rental fee, according to the vendor contract in Patricia's file. Round tables, cream linens, those crystal cylinder vases with the lilies as centerpieces. A DJ near the dance floor. Place cards written by hand in the calligraphy Kayla had texted me photos of while she was practicing. I'd hit the heart emoji every time, because the script really was beautiful. I thought about those hearts while I ate dinner and waited. Serena and I sat at table 3. She had the envelopes in her purse. We ate and talked about her bar exam prep, a documentary we'd both seen, a case from her property law reading. The normalcy kept me grounded. I was grateful for it. The toast started after the main course. Derek's best man went for 6 minutes. Talked about Derek's loyalty, his fantasy football failures, a marriage joke that got a moderate response. Everyone laughed and clapped. I clapped too. Then the DJ's voice came over the speaker, warm and unhurried. And now? A toast from the maid of honor, Morgan Hayes. Serena placed the envelopes on the table in front of me without being asked. I picked them up. She handed me the microphone. I rolled out into the open space between the tables that Kayla had designated earlier for wheelchair access. She'd been thoughtful about that. It was one of the details I had held during those 6 months alongside everything else. I stopped there for a moment before raising the microphone. From that position, I could see the entire room. Derek's family was on the right. People with no investment in any version of this story. No loyalty to any specific framing. The bridal party table had Madison, who had spent 3 months managing the narrative in group chats Serena had screenshot. Kayla's social circle was in the center. The people who had watched 18 months of hashtagged content and believed they understood what they were looking at. Serena was at table 3, hands on the table, purse in her lap, looking exactly as she did under pressure. Kayla was at the head table, one hand holding her champagne, the other in Derek's. Radiant with the specific joy of someone who had reached the destination they wanted and hadn't recognized any turbulence in the flight path. She thought she knew what was coming next. I raised the microphone. Hello, everyone. I'm Morgan Hayes. Kayla is my sister. I've known her for 29 years, long enough to know her better than almost anyone in this room. I want to share a piece of that understanding tonight. The expectant smiles went around the room. A few people leaned forward slightly. The automatic posture of an audience settling in for something warm. When I was medically evacuated from Afghanistan with a shattered leg, a traumatic brain injury, and 4 surgeries ahead of me, Kayla flew to Bethesda to help me. I want to say clearly, in front of everyone, that I am genuinely grateful for that. She showed up. She managed things I couldn't manage. That mattered to me. And I wanted her to hear me say that publicly, before I say the next thing. The room shifted. I could feel the collective recalibration, the moment an audience realizes the tone isn't what they anticipated. In helping manage my affairs, Kayla held a limited financial power of attorney. In the 14 months following her visit, 18 transactions occurred from my VA disability compensation account, an account the power of attorney explicitly excluded, to an account registered to my sister's address here in Nashville. Total silence, not gradual, instant. The only sound in that barn was the hum of the DJ's monitor near the dance floor, the click of someone's champagne glass hitting a table, and the slow rotation of the ceiling fans above. I want to be precise about what VA disability compensation is. It's not a bonus. It's not a gift from the government. It's the formal recognition that a person's body was permanently altered in the service of their country. It's medical money. It's recovery money. While these 18 transactions were occurring, I was learning how to walk. I raised one of the envelopes. I have the documentation. I opened it and held up the single-page summary, the one Patricia and I had distilled into something any adult could read in 90 seconds. I said the last thing the spreadsheet said. Transaction 18. November 28th, $900. Bylaw 74. I placed the sheet back into the envelope. I have 9 copies of this summary available for any family members or interested parties. I also have an attorney who has been retained to pursue formal legal remedies. That process is separate from tonight. Tonight is about information. Everyone in this room came here to celebrate this marriage. You deserve to do that with accurate information about what it is you're celebrating. Kayla was out of her chair. Morgan? Her voice wasn't steady in a way I'd never heard before. Not the practiced tremor she used when she wanted to look vulnerable. Something raw. I'm almost finished, I said. I looked her in the eye for exactly 1 second, then turned back to the room. I'm not here to end this evening or this marriage. I'm here because I spent 11 years in the Army operating under the premise that honesty and accountability are not optional values. I still hold that premise, and I hold it before witnesses. I placed the envelopes on the nearest table. I set the microphone down next to them. Kayla, for the last time, directly to my sister. I hope your marriage is long and honest and real. I hope you build something with Derek that neither of you has to hide. The legal process begins on Monday. That's not cruelty. That's accounting. I nodded to Serena. She stood up. We left along the path Kayla had cleared for the wheelchair. Past the Casablanca lilies in the crystal vases. Past the dessert table. Out the barn doors into the September air. The lilies were still beautiful as I passed them. That was true and remained true. Beautiful things and dishonest things are not mutually exclusive. That's one of the harder lessons. Behind us, I heard the noise erupt in the barn. I didn't look back. The drive to the hotel took 22 minutes. Serena drove. I sat in the passenger seat watching Nashville move past in the dark outside the window and felt something I hadn't anticipated. Not exactly relief, though there was a piece of that. More like the sensation that a weight that had been carried unevenly for a very long time was finally allowed to rest on the floor. Serena didn't say anything for 15 minutes. Then, "You want food?" I said yes. She found a late-night diner, and we sat in a corner booth and ate eggs and toast at 10:30 p.m. And she told me about a property law case involving a contract that was spectacularly, historically awful, and I listened. And that was the moment I felt most normal in months. My phone had 47 missed calls over the first 3 days. I logged the number. I didn't answer any of them. Kayla texted. Kayla emailed. Aunt Geraldine sent 2 texts that arrived in 2 parts. Cousin Marcus sent 1 text. That wasn't right. With a period, which I read and respected for its economy of words. Madison, the maid of honor, sent a text saying she never said anything like that about the disability money, which was easy to resolve since Serena still had the screenshots. Derek didn't know. The night of the wedding, he confronted Kayla when they got back to the hotel. The conversation reportedly went until nearly 4 a.m. and ended with him in a different room. They stayed together. That's their choice, and I have no commentary on it beyond wishing them both something better than a foundation built on a concealment. Madison sent me 2 more texts over the following week, both framed as attempts to help everyone understand each other better, which I understood as attempts to manage the narrative before it hardened into fact. I forwarded both to my attorney with a note. The group chat screenshots, combined with the texting pattern, were sufficient to establish that the cover story was active and intentional. My attorney included a mention of Madison in the demand letter as a potentially involved third party. Madison sent no further texts after that. My attorney sent the formal demand letter to Kayla on October 9th. The letter detailed the 18 transactions, cited the explicit violation of the power of attorney, outlined the civil legal remedies available, and noted precisely that the transactions could be characterized under Tennessee law as financial exploitation of a disabled adult, carrying criminal implications. Kayla retained counsel on October 17th. The negotiation took 10 weeks. The agreement was signed on December 3rd. Kayla agreed to full restitution of the $23,400, structured over 36 months, with a lien on certain personal assets as security. The agreement included a written acknowledgement, not an apology, because acknowledgements and apologies serve different legal functions, and my attorney was precise about the distinction. that the transactions occurred and were unauthorized under the terms of the power of attorney. The closure, if you're looking for it, is this. The wedding that the $23,400 helped finance now exists only in documents. The hashtag went dark 12 days after the reception. The curated content, every venue announcement, every flat lay photo. Every pre-wedding self-care post made possible by the transfers from my disability account vanished from Kayla's profiles within 3 weeks. The 14,000 people who liked those posts will not find them if they search today. My sister spent 14 months diverting my medical recovery money into a public image of a perfect life, and the perfect life is gone from the internet while the repayment schedule continues on time. The social landscape flattened. Kayla's circle retracted. Several of those closer friends had been in that barn. Aunt Geraldine called me 8 weeks later and said she had a clearer understanding of the situation, which I translated to mean she had seen the documentation and it didn't support her initial position. I thanked her for calling. I was appropriately cordial. The first payment arrived on January 15th, on time, at 8 a.m. In the exact amount stipulated in the agreement. I looked at the notification for a moment. Then, I opened my laptop, went to the folder named KH Financial Record, moved the signed settlement agreement into it. Next to Patricia's original report, the attorney correspondence, the bank statements, the summary sheets printed inside the 9 envelopes. Exhibit 19 and Exhibit 20. I looked at the directory. I closed it. I shut the laptop. I made coffee. I sat by the window and looked at the lake. Not a victory. Not relief in any theatrical sense. The ledger was complete. The account was in the process of being restored. The numbers that had been wrong for 14 months were now, on paper and on schedule, slowly becoming right. That was enough. I currently have no relationship with Kayla. That's not a punishment, and it's not permanent by design. It's an accurate description of where things stand. And I have learned to value accuracy over comfort when describing my own life. For 32 years, I was available on demand. Not just accessible, but available. 24 hours. Unconditional, uncalculated. The morning after that wedding, I became someone who is only accessible by invitation. Not out of anger, out of accuracy. Because the version of me that was available on demand absorbed costs for decades that I was never meant to carry alone. And accuracy required me to stop. If you're watching this and you recognize that role, the reliable one, the responsible one, the one whose stability everyone else around them has quietly designated as a piece of available infrastructure, I want to say something directly to you. The reason it's hard to stop isn't because you're weak, it's because you've been trained. Families built around dysfunction, the kind where one person continuously absorbs the cost of another person's choices, don't survive unless the reliable one continues to believe their reliability is a moral obligation rather than a choice. They teach you this early and thoroughly enough that by the time you're an adult, stopping feels like a character defect rather than a correction. You feel guilty for saying no. You feel selfish for protecting what you worked for. You feel cold for refusing to absorb a consequence someone else manufactured. Those feelings are not evidence that you are wrong. They are the echo of a system that needs you to believe you are wrong so it can keep running. When you stop, when you actually stop, hold the boundary, and don't open the door because someone is crying on the other side. The system experiences that as a malfunction. That's how you know the boundary is working. The guilt doesn't last forever. I want to say that specifically to you. It recedes. And what it leaves behind, eventually, is something that surprised me. Quiet. Actual quiet. The kind that doesn't feel suspicious after a while. The kind where you stop waiting for an interruption. This is what I understand now that I didn't understand at 22, or 26, or 30. Or even 5 years ago when I bought my first house and started believing I might be allowed to have something that belonged entirely to me. Being accessible and being available are not the same thing. Being accessible means people can reach you. Being available means you have no limit on what you will give. Responsible people in dysfunctional families almost always confuse those two states, or rather, the families confuse them, and the responsible person inherits the confusion. The confusion isn't accidental. Limitless availability is what the system requires to operate. The moment you differentiate between the two, the system has a problem. There is also a difference between helping and absorbing. Helping someone through a genuine hardship, a medical crisis, a sudden job loss, a divorce. The kinds of things that happen to good people through no defect of character is not what I'm describing. I'm describing the specific dynamic where someone continuously manufactures consequences through their own choices, and the responsible person is expected to absorb those consequences indefinitely, and any refusal is framed as a betrayal. That isn't help. That's a system where one person's irresponsibility is subsidized by another person's discipline. The subsidy doesn't help the person creating the consequence. It removes the only feedback mechanism that could. Donovan Torres never got to come home. He didn't get to rebuild his body or find out who he was going to be with the rest of his life, or hold the child his wife was carrying. I think about him when I am tempted to make my own recovery smaller than it needs to be to keep someone else comfortable. The very least I can do, the very least, is be honest about what my life requires, and insist that the people in it treat it accordingly. If you're in the middle of this right now, still in the stage before the documentation, before the lawyer, before the moment of absolute clarity, let me say this as plainly as I can. You are allowed to protect what you built. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to stop being an emergency fund for people who manufacture emergencies. You are allowed to untangle your stability from someone else's dysfunction. You don't need permission from the people who benefit from your availability to stop being available. They won't give it. That permission is yours to take. A boundary, a refusal, a choice to stop explaining and start documenting. That's how it begins. Not all at once. One step at a time. One file at a time. I rolled into that reception in a wheelchair. I rolled out after saying the most honest thing I've said in 32 years of being the reliable one. The wheelchair is still there. The leg is still being rebuilt. The tinnitus is still humming in my left ear. The TBI still occasionally drops a word out of the middle of a sentence. But the account is in restitution, on schedule, documented. The folder is closed, and for the first time in my adult life, no one is standing at my door with a moving truck, expecting me to give up my space. That's what accountability looks like when it's handled quietly, precisely, and documented. Not punishment, not cruelty, accounting. If this story connects with something you've been through, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you want to see more long-form stories about building a life that actually belongs to you, the actual, unglamorous, document-heavy work of it, subscribe to this channel. There's more coming. I'll see you in the next video.